What kind of work demanded that thousands of men walk daily into forests, where a single mistake, whether a slipping cable, a misjudged cut, or a falling branch, could end a life in seconds? And why did an entire nation depend on that risk? In the early 20th century, America's hunger for lumber to build cities, lay railroads, and shore up mines fueled the deadliest civilian occupation in the country's history. A timber industry evolved far faster than safety could keep pace. 82 deaths for every 100,000 workers every single year. Stay with this investigation and subscribe, because this is part of a deeper exploration into the hidden systems that built modern civilization. It begins with the men who cut the first notch. In the deep hush of dawn, long before the first whistle or the grind of steel, a faller steps into the forest's cathedral. He moves with a practiced eye, scanning the crown and the lean of a Douglas fir that towers more than 200 feet overhead. Every decision begins with him. He reads the wind, the slope, the way the roots grip the earth. The ground is slick with moss and needles, but his focus narrows to the geometry of the cut, a calculation that cannot be rushed or delegated. There is no machinery yet, just the weight of the job and the knowledge that a single misjudgment could send thousands of pounds of timber crashing anywhere. A 12-foot crosscut saw, sharpened to a razor's edge, is his instrument. He and his partner drive it back and forth, each stroke a test of rhythm and trust. They start with the undercut, a wedge-shaped notch on the side where the tree must fall. The angle and depth are measured by eye and muscle memory, honed over seasons of close calls. Too shallow, and the tree might split or twist. Too deep, and the hinge, the living wood that guides the fall, will not hold. The back cut follows, just above the notch on the opposite side. This is the moment where everything hangs in the balance. The saw bites through heartwood, tension builds, and the tree begins to groan. A faller's hands steady the saw, but it is his judgment that sets the chain of events in motion. The hinge must be perfect, a thin strip of uncut wood that will steer the trunk's descent. There is no second chance. Misread the lean and the tree could snap back, crush a partner, or topple the wrong direction toward a camp, a rail line, or a crew waiting below. In these old-growth stands, a single trunk outweighs a freight car. The forest floor is a tangle of roots and stumps, each one a hazard if the fall goes awry. The final moments are quiet, even reverent. A last glance at the canopy, a nod to his partner, and the back cut is finished. The saw pulls free. The tree stands for a breath, then the fibers at the hinge stretch and tear. Gravity takes over. The trunk tips, accelerating with a force that cannot be stopped. Branches snap, bark flies, and the ground shakes as the giant slams down exactly where the faller intended. Or not. In a good cut, the tree lands clean, ready for the next phase. In a bad one, chaos follows. Every day, this scene repeats hundreds of times across the timber camps of Washington and Oregon. The faller's work is the first link in a chain that will soon pull in steam, steel cables, and brute mechanical force. But in these first minutes, before the donkey engine fires up or the whistle signals the yard crew, it is human judgment alone that stands between order and disaster. The precision of the cut, the angle of the notch, the split-second read of wind and wood, these are the crafts that set the entire system in motion. For the men who swing the saw, every tree is a test, and the forest keeps its own score. The forest silence is broken by the deep, rhythmic pulse of a steam donkey coming to life. Where muscle and saw once ruled, now a boiler mounted on skids and bristling with pipes feeds pressurized steam into a single-cylinder engine. The heart of this machine is a steel drum 12 to 18 inches across, wound with cable as thick as a man's thumb. When the fireman shovels coal and the pressure climbs to 150, sometimes even 200 pounds per square inch. The donkey is ready to work. A lever throws the engine into gear. Steam hisses through valves, driving a piston that spins the drum with a force measured not in hands, but in kips, tens of thousands of pounds. Catalogs from Lamb and Hayes, the era's leading builders, boasted that a mid-sized donkey could pull between 10 and 25 kips on a single line. That's enough force to drag a loaded freight car or tear a log the size of a city lamppost straight up a muddy slope. The physics are simple but unforgiving. Pressure in the boiler becomes torque on the drum, and the drum's radius turns that torque into raw pulling power on the cable. With 180 pounds per square inch behind it, a 12-inch drum can deliver over 15,000 foot-pounds of torque, enough to yank a multi-ton log from stump to landing in seconds. The cable itself is no ordinary rope. Drawn from Pennsylvania wire mills, these steel lines carry a breaking strength of 30 to 65 kips, depending on diameter and construction. The most common type, a 6x19 or 6x37 pattern, balances flexibility with brute strength. Each cable is spliced and tested by hand, with field manuals warning that a splice showing more than 2% stretch under 5 kips should be replaced immediately. If a cable fails under load, the stored energy can send it whipping back at over 100 feet per second, fast enough to sever limbs or flatten a man before he hears the snap. The donkey's drum is more than a winch. It is a precision tool. Spiral flutes guide the cable, preventing cross-winding and jams that could stall the entire operation. Operators use steam-driven gear trains to pay out or reel in the line in quarter-turn increments, allowing for minute control during critical lifts. A spring-loaded drum brake patented in 1909 gives the operator a fighting chance to halt a runaway load, though even the best brakes can fail under sudden spikes of tension. Maintenance is constant. Stay bolts must be torqued to 75 foot-pounds, graphite paste worked into the bearings, and every weld inspected for cracks that could turn a routine pull into a disaster. The machine's appetite for fuel and water is unrelenting. A donkey can burn through a ton of coal and hundreds of gallons of water in a single shift, its firebox glowing red as the boiler feeds the relentless demand for pressure. The fireman's job is to keep the water gauge above the danger line. If the crown sheet runs dry, the result is an explosion that can hurl shrapnel and scalding steam across the landing, with fatal consequences. With each cycle, the donkey transforms the landscape. Logs that once took teams of oxen days to move now slide across the forest floor in minutes. The mechanical heart pounds out a new rhythm of work, its whistle signaling the next pull, the next risk. What began as a matter of muscle and judgment has become a contest of physics and steel, one that will soon demand even higher rigging, longer cables, and new ways to conquer the vertical world of the old-growth forest. A single tree stripped bare and crowned with a block becomes the axis of the entire operation. This is the spar tree, chosen for its height and straightness, transformed into a vertical anchor that rises 150 feet, sometimes 200 feet above the forest floor. Selecting the right spar is as exacting as felling itself. A hidden pocket of rot or a slender crown can spell disaster when tons of tension hit the cables. Once marked, the climber's work begins. The spar tree climber stands apart, part athlete, part engineer, all nerve. With spikes strapped to his boots and a coil of rope across his chest, he climbs into a vertical world where every step is a test of the bark's grip and the tree's strength. The climb is slow and deliberate. Wind tugs at his back and the ground crew shrinks to specks, their voices lost in the hush above the canopy. At 150 feet or even 200 feet, there is nothing but air below and a job that demands both hands free. At the top, the climber first tops the spar, cutting away the uppermost section in a spray of wood chips. Then comes the rigging. Heavy steel guy lines radiate from the spar's head to the ground in every direction, each one tensioned to hold the trunk upright against the strain of moving logs. These guy lines are feats of engineering, anchored deep in stumps or rock, tightened with turnbuckles checked for fraying or corrosion. Any weakness, a missed kink or a rusted strand, can turn the spar into a falling spear when the load comes on. With the guy line set, the climber installs the main block and, for skyline systems, a second spar or distant anchor. High lead rigging uses a single spar running a lead cable from the donkey engine up to the block, then down to the logs. The skyline system is more complex, a heavy cable stretched between two spar trees or engineered towers, sometimes spanning hundreds of feet. Suspended from this cable is the carriage, a wheeled device that rides the line, carrying logs over ravines and tangled ground that would stop any ox team or tractor. The skyline's dual anchor arrangement lets it move timber in 3 dimensions, not just along the ground, but through the air. Now, every log's path depends on this aerial rigging. When the donkey operator throws the lever, force travels up the guy lines, through the block, down the main line, and into the log. Each part must absorb and redirect the load, distributing tens of thousands of pounds across wood, steel, and earth. The climber's work makes this possible, but puts him in the most exposed position on the site. A slip, a snapped guy line, or a misjudged cable tension can send the spar crashing with the climber still roped in place. Accident reports tell of men vanishing from sight, their last moments spent in the sway and creak of a tree that suddenly gives way. Only when the climber descends and the rigging is tested does the operation move forward. The spar tree stands, a silent, improbable tower ready to carry the weight of a day's production. Every log that swings through the air is a measure of the climber's judgment and the rigging's precision. Here, the vertical is as dangerous as the horizontal, and the margin for error is measured in lives. A single whistle pierces the morning fog, a sharp clipped note that slices through the drone of the donkey engine and the distant calls of birds. In these woods, sound is command. Every move, every surge of steel and timber hangs on the coded blasts of the whistle. The man holding that power is the whistle punk. His job is pure nerve. Perched on the edge of chaos, one hand on the whistle cord, one eye on the crew, he translates the invisible choreography of men and machines into a language of blares and silences. The system is simple on paper. 1 short blast means get ready, 2 shorts means pull, 3 means stop. A long unbroken wail means emergency, drop everything and run clear. But in the field where rain muffles sound and steam clouds the view, the margin for misunderstanding is razor thin. A single mistake, 1 short instead of 2, or a muffled call lost in the wind can set thousands of pounds of cable and timber in motion before a man can even shout a warning. The choker setter feels this risk with every step. He races ahead of the pull, threading a steel choker around the log's base, crouching low as the cable snakes with latent force. His hands move fast, but his ears are tuned to the whistle. The moment he hears 2 shorts, he knows the donkey will roar to life and the cable will snap taut. If he's still in the bite, there's no time to escape. Crew diaries from the era are filled with terse entries. Missed the signal, lost a man. Every camp posts the whistle code where men gather for coffee. 1 short means prepare to lift. 2 shorts means lift, engage the winch. 3 shorts means stop, brake hard. A long blast means emergency, abort the pull. There are variations, double short signals for special cases, but these 4 signals run the show. The whistle punk's arm aches from the repetition, but his mind never wanders. His error is everyone's peril. The rhythm of the day becomes a kind of music, punctuated by these signals. A choker setter darts out, loops the cable, flashes a sign. The whistle punk pulls once, men tense, ready. 2 more shorts, the donkey operator throws the lever, steam hisses, the drum spins and the log lurches from its bed. 3 shorts, a sudden stop, brake engaged, the log halts mid-swing. The air is thick with anticipation. Every sound is a cue. Every silence a test of nerve. Miscommunication is not rare. In the oral histories, men recall the sound of a whistle echoing wrong, a blast swallowed by wind or steam. One choker setter, Eric Larson, described how a misheard signal in 1912 sent a log skidding sideways, crushing a loader against the landing. The company revised its whistle chart that year, adding a new pattern, double short then long, a last chance call to halt everything. But even the best system cannot outpace the speed of steel under tension. The whistle punk and the choker setter form the most fragile link in the chain. One commands with sound, the other gambles with position. Between them, the entire operation breathes, signal, act, repeat. When the code works, logs move with the precision of a clock. When it fails, the silence that follows is often permanent. In the timber age, every whistle is a wager, and every day begins and ends on the edge of disaster. Where the forest thinned, rails took over. Temporary logging railroads built in days and gone just as fast, stretched 3 feet from rail to rail, narrow enough to snake through tangled canyons and over ravines. Timber trestles rose from the stumps, spiked together from green logs, their strength untested and their lifespan measured in seasons. Every foot of track was provisional, meant to last only as long as the timber above it. The rails spiked onto rough ties with little ballast, shifted with each rainstorm or passing load, their stability always in question. Rolling stock matched the tracks for impermanence. Flat cars, sometimes nothing more than planks on steel wheels, hauled logs that dwarfed the oil-fired locomotives. These engines, stripped to the essentials, ran hot and hard. The engineer kept one hand on the throttle, eyes locked on the rails ahead. The fireman, face streaked with soot, fed oil-soaked wood or coal into a furnace that could reach 2,000 degrees. Boilers built for portability, not longevity, demanded constant vigilance. A missed water check or a stuck safety valve could turn the cab into a trap, the difference between routine and disaster measured in seconds. Braking was a matter of muscle and timing. Unlike mainline trains, these logging cars relied on handbrakes. Iron wheels spun tight by the brakeman, car by car, as the train edged down steep grades. There were no automatic air brakes, no backup if a car broke loose. On a 5% grade, one missed turn could send loaded flats racing downhill, picking up speed until only a curve, a tree, or the ground could stop them. Accident records from the time list more than one runaway, the names of engineers and brakemen lost in a moment's slip or a mechanical failure. The system's vulnerability was everywhere. Timber trestles thrown up in days, sometimes swayed under a full load, each creak a warning. The 3-foot gauge allowed sharper turns and steeper climbs, but less stability. A single jolt could send a car tumbling into the ravine below. Rails could wash out overnight, leaving a gap that revealed itself only as the train rounded a blind corner. The handbrake system left every descent a gamble, the brakeman's grip the last defense against gravity. For the crew, every run was a negotiation with risk. The engineer watched for signals from the landing, reading flags or gestures through the trees. The fireman kept the pressure steady, listening for the hiss or rattle that meant trouble. The brakeman moved from car to car, tightening or loosening brakes as the grade changed, always aware that the next curve could be his last. There was no margin for error. Every log that reached the mill depended on this fragile chain, the tracks, the trestles, the men. The danger zone did not end at the landing, it ran the length of the rails, stretching the risk all the way to the sawmill. Numbers alone can't capture what was lost in the timber camps of the Pacific Northwest, but the numbers are staggering. In Washington during the early 1900s, the fatality rate for loggers reached 82.2 deaths per 100,000 workers each year. That's more than 5 times the average for American industry at the time, higher than mining, higher than construction. In practical terms, it meant that for every 150 men who entered the woods, one would not come home by year's end. 2 deaths for every 1,000 workers every single year. Behind each statistic was a family left to reckon with the aftermath. For most, there was no insurance, no guaranteed compensation. The loss of a breadwinner echoed beyond the woods, straight into kitchens and parlors across the region. In March 1907, a logger named Christian Nelson was killed at the Monohan sawmill, crushed by a falling log. His widow wrote to the company, her letter preserved in the archives. "Since Christian's accident, I have had no means for the children. The rent is due and the grocer will not extend more credit. Please tell me if there is anything the company can do." The reply, like so many others, was brief and final. There are no funds for such cases. These stories played out again and again. A single misstep, a snapped cable, a runaway train, a tree that twisted in the wind left wives and children to face an uncertain future. Diaries from the era speak of mothers taking in laundry, sons leaving school to work the green chain, daughters sent to relatives in the city. The death of one logger rippled through entire communities, erasing the margin between survival and destitution. The numbers on the state's accident tables are cold and impersonal, but every entry is a household upended. The risk was known, the danger accepted, but the cost was paid in private, in letters and ledgers that tell a quieter story of grief. For the men who worked the timber, and for those who waited at home, the price of progress was counted not just in board feet, but in empty chairs at the table. Eric Larson's voice, captured years after he left the woods, still holds the weight of that morning in 1912. The camp was alive before dawn, the donkey's boiler already rumbling, the air thick with cedar and coal smoke. Larson, working as a choker setter, felt the heat pulsing from the steel drum and heard the hiss of steam escaping a stubborn valve. Men moved with practiced caution, eyes darting between the pressure gauge and the water glass, searching for the shimmer that meant the crown sheet was safe. Larson remembers a strange quiet before it happened. The donkey operator tapped the gauge and muttered about the needle running high. The fireman, sweat streaking his face, turned to shovel more coal. Larson was 20 feet away, looping cable, when the world tore open. No warning. The boiler exploded with a sound he described as like the sky coming apart. One moment the doghouse stood solid, iron rivets, steam lines. The next it vanished in a cloud of shrapnel and scalding vapor. The blast slammed him to the ground. He felt steam burn his arms, tasted metal, then silence. He tried to stand. The landing was wrecked. Timbers splintered, cable flung into the brush, men shouting for help. The operator and firemen were gone, killed instantly. Larson's hands shook as he crawled toward the wreckage, calling out names, searching for anyone alive. The donkey's drum, warped and smoking, sat half buried in mud. The air reeked of burned flesh and hot iron. Years later, Larson could still hear the whistle that never blew, a warning that should have sent men running. He spoke of how routine vanished in a heartbeat, how a day's work could turn to loss in a single breath. The accident report blamed low water and a faulty safety valve, but Larson's memory left no doubt. In the rush for timber, even the best men could be undone by a moment's neglect, a worn part, or a pressure gauge that lied. In the camps, life and death balanced on inches of water and pounds of steam. Every calculation in the timber camps began with a ledger, not a safety manual. Wages for a faller in 1912 ran $1.20 to $1.50 for every 1,000 board feet cut, a system that made every hour, every tree, a race against the clock. The price for raw logs, just 7 cents per board foot by 1915, set the tempo not only for the woods but for the entire Pacific Northwest. If a crew could haul 10,000 board feet in a day, that meant $12 to $15 divided among men who knew that minutes lost to caution meant dollars lost to competitors. Company payrolls from Weyerhaeuser and Simpson Palm show the relentless math. Piece rate contracts paid for volume, not for vigilance. Crew leaders working under these terms pushed teams to keep the logs moving, even as the risks multiplied with every shortcut. Budget ledgers from 1913 list machinery outlays, steam donkeys, cable, rails totaling $2 to $3 million each season. Yet in those same books there is no line for safety harnesses, no allocation for protective headgear, no fund for first aid kits. The only numbers that mattered were production targets and payout per load. Minutes from a 1914 board meeting, preserved in the University of Washington archives, capture the prevailing attitude. The loss of a worker is regrettable, but the value of timber moved before the next incident outweighs the cost. The calculation was cold but not hidden. Directors saw the fatality rate, 82 deaths per 100,000 loggers each year, as the price of doing business in a market where speed meant survival. The pressure to produce shaped every decision, from the pace of the saw to the tension in the cable. The more a crew could cut, the more they earned until the day the cable snapped or the boiler blew. The economics of the timber age rewarded those who moved fastest, not those who took the time to check a splice or inspect a spar. In this world, cash came before caution, and the risks were written into the very structure of the job. July 1909, Enumclaw, Washington. A high-lead logging crew worked the north slope above the Green River, relying on a 3/4-inch steel cable, spliced by hand and stretched tight. On a heavy pull, the cable snapped. The recoil lashed through the crew with the force of a thrown axe. 3 choker setters died instantly. 2 climbers, still roped to the spar, were struck and fell. Both donkey operators were caught in the backlash. 7 men gone in seconds. The coroner's report blamed metal fatigue. The cable had been reused, never inspected, and was marked as serviceable for 1 more season in the company ledger. 6 years later, in 1915, a narrow-gauge locomotive braked on a steep grade above the North Fork of the Snoqualmie. Loaded with fresh-cut logs, the rails slick from rain, the brakeman spun the iron wheel. The shoes were worn to metal with no backup and no air brakes. The engine picked up speed, rounded a curve, and jumped the track, dragging 2 loaded flats into a clearing where log skidders worked. The locomotive crushed 5 men, the engineer, the fireman, the brakeman, and 2 skidders. The state accident log cited worn brakes, missed inspections, and no safety siding. The train had run that grade for weeks without a single check. September 1922, Southern Oregon, on the west slope of Mount Hood. A new skyline rig was going up. The spar tree, 200 feet tall, was chosen for height, not health. Climbers ascended. Riggers tightened guy lines, and the donkey operator took up slack. As the skyline cable reached tension, the spar gave way. Internal rot, invisible from the ground, split the trunk. The tree sheared off, collapsing onto the crew below. 4 climbers, 3 riggers, 2 operators, 9 men dead. The inquest found no inspection for internal decay. The foreman had been told to use any standing tree over 150 feet. The company moved on the next week. These were not accidents of chance. Each was written in the ledgers and logs, the result of a system that counted timber, not lives. Today, every safety harness and hard hat in American industry traces back to forests where risk was the rule, not the exception. Mechanization promised progress, but it multiplied the stakes, forcing labor protections to evolve only after tragedy struck. As automation accelerates across new frontiers, the cost of speed still tests the boundaries of human judgment and law. The legacy of that peril remains etched in every structure we inhabit. Stay with us as we uncover more hidden systems. Subscribe for future investigations.